There's a sign above the front door of the Harlow Lake Lodge that my grandfather carved himself from a piece of driftwood he pulled out of the water the day he built this place. And it says, "The water always brings you back." I used to think it was just something he said because it sounded nice on a postcard. I don't think that anymore. My name is Elliot Crane. I'm 34 years old, and I've been running the Harlow Lake Lodge in the mountains of northern Oregon since my parents died 18 months apart. My father from a stroke he never woke up from, and my mother from something the doctors called organ failure, but that I've started to think had a different cause entirely. I grew up here, left for college, lived a normal life for 12 years, and came back because there was nobody else, and because the lodge was all they had to leave me, and because the lawyer who read the will handed me 3 sealed envelopes and told me the order in which I was supposed to open them. And something about the weight of those envelopes told me that coming back was not as simple as it seemed. I want to tell you about the guests. Not all of them. Most guests at Harlow Lake Lodge are exactly what you'd expect. Fishermen, hikers, couples looking for somewhere quiet, families on summer trips. Normal people with normal purposes who leave after a week and never come back, or come back every year like clockwork and become something like friends over time. The guests I want to tell you about are different. They've been coming to Harlow Lake Lodge for as long as I can remember. Every 3 years, almost to the week, from the 1st of October until the 7th. A family of 6, an older man and woman, a middle-aged couple, and 2 young adults, a man and a woman, who arrive in the same dark green panel van they've always arrived in, who pay in cash, who book the largest cabin on the water, and who my parents treated with a deference that didn't match any other guests, a specific, careful attentiveness that I noticed as a child without being able to name, and that I understand now was closer to fear than hospitality. They were always quiet, always polite in the specific way that people are polite when they don't particularly care about you, but understand that courtesy is useful. They kept to the cabin during the day, always. I never once saw any of them outside before dark in all the years they visited, and in the evenings they would walk down to the water's edge and stay there for hours. And in the morning, when I went to check the dock, there were always fish on the boards, dozens of them, and they were always dead. And the strange thing, the thing I noticed even as a child, was that they had no marks on them, no hook wounds, no net damage, just dead fish in neat rows, as if something had simply drained the life out of them while they swam. The other thing I noticed as a child, and couldn't explain, and eventually filed under the category of things my parents clearly didn't want me to ask about, was that this family never seemed to age. Not slowly, not gracefully, not at all. The first time I can remember seeing them, I was 6 years old, and the older man had white hair and the particular gravity of someone who had been old for a long time. The last time I saw them before I left for college, I was 17, and he looked exactly the same. The last time I saw them before my parents died, I was 29 and had been back for 2 years helping run the lodge, and he looked exactly the same. 11 years of visits across 23 years of my life, and not one of them changed by a single visible day. I asked my mother about it once, when I was maybe 12. She looked at me for a long moment, with an expression I've spent decades trying to decode, something between warning and resignation, and she said,
"Some people are just lucky, Elliot. Just don't stare, okay?"
I didn't ask again. When my father died, he left 3 sealed envelopes with the lawyer with instructions on when to open them, which I've already told you. But what I didn't tell you is what was in the first one, which was to be opened when I took over the lodge. Because the first envelope is where this story really begins. The letter inside was written in my father's handwriting, precise and careful the way everything he did was precise and careful. And it said the following, which I'm going to tell you as close to word for word as I can remember, because I've read it so many times, the language has worn grooves in my brain.
Elliot, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and the lodge is yours. And you need to know some things that I should have told you in person but never found the right time for, which is the coward's excuse, but it's the honest one. The family that comes every 3 years in October. You know who I mean. They have an arrangement with this property that goes back to your grandfather's time. The arrangement keeps this lodge running. Don't ask about the arrangement. Don't try to renegotiate it, and don't do anything that would make them feel unwelcome. They will leave a payment when they go. Put it in the safe in the office. Don't count it. Don't ask where it comes from. The cabin on the water is theirs when they're here. Don't go in while they're staying. Don't go in for 3 days after they leave. After 3 days, clean it the way I showed you, and if you find anything in the water, don't touch it with your bare hands. One more thing. If they ask about the dock on the north side, the one I told you was structurally unsound and had closed off when you were 8, tell them it's still closed. Don't let them go there. This matters more than anything else I've written here. I'm sorry I didn't say any of this to your face. I love you.
I read that letter 4 times in the lawyer's office, and then folded it and put it in my jacket pocket, and drove the 3 hours back to the lodge without stopping, and went down to the water and sat on the dock and watched the lake until it got dark, which is a thing I've done my whole life when I need to think. And I thought about the north dock, the one I'd been told was structurally unsound since I was 8 years old, the one I'd never once seen my father work on or assess or make any move toward actually repairing. And I thought about what it meant that the one specific instruction in his letter that he'd underlined was about keeping 6 people I barely knew away from a dock they'd probably never asked about. I went to the north dock the next morning. It wasn't structurally unsound. The wood was old but solid, the pilings were firm, the cleats were rusted but functional. Nothing about it was unsafe. What was different about it was the water directly beneath it, which was darker than the surrounding lake in a way I'd always attributed to depth and shadow and had never thought to investigate. And the smell, which I noticed now that I was paying attention, not a bad smell, not a rot smell, but something specific and mineral, like the stone rooms deep in caves, like something very old and very still. Hammered into the wood of the nearest piling, just above the waterline, was a strip of iron about 8 inches long, and hammered into the piling across from it was another, and in the pilings beyond those, another pair, and so on down the length of the dock. Iron on both sides, regular intervals, a kind of threshold. And I stood on that dock and looked at those iron strips and understood somehow, in the way you understand things that you don't have language for yet, that my father hadn't closed the north dock because it was dangerous. He'd closed it because whatever was in the water beneath it was. The family arrived on the 2nd of October, the year after my father died and 4 months after my mother followed him. I was as prepared as I could be, which was not very prepared. I'd cleaned the water cabin. I'd come to think of it as the water cabin, the one on the lake, the one they always took. I'd stocked it and made sure the dock access was clear and stood behind the front desk of the lodge office waiting for the green panel van, which arrived at dusk exactly the way it always had, and the 6 of them came through the door the way they always had. And the older man greeted me as if no time had passed, as if I'd always been the one behind the desk, as if my parents weren't gone. He was the same. They were all the same. Not similar looking, not well preserved. The same, identically, precisely the same as every other October of my life. And standing across from them in the office, I felt the specific vertigo of a person confronting something their rational mind has been successfully managing for decades and has just lost the ability to manage. I gave them the key to the water cabin. The younger man took it without looking at me. The older woman watched me with pale eyes that I'd always found difficult to hold, and still found difficult to hold. It was the younger woman, I'd always thought of her as close to my age, though that was clearly meaningless, who paused at the door. She looked back at me and said, quietly, so the others wouldn't hear,
I heard about your parents. I'm sorry.
It was the most any of them had ever said to me unprompted. I didn't know what to do with it. I said thank you, and she went out the door, and I watched them walk down to the water cabin with their bags and didn't sleep at all that night. I kept to the main lodge for the first 2 days, brought their meals to the cabin door and left them, the way my parents had always done. Watched from the lodge porch as they walked to the water at dusk and stood at the edge and did whatever it was they did, which from a distance looked like nothing. 6 people standing at a lakeshore in the dark, still as stones, for hours. On the 3rd evening, I watched them more carefully. The lake was calm that night. No wind, the water a dark mirror, and from the porch I watched the 6 of them arranged along the bank in a line, and I watched the water in front of each of them. And I saw what I'd never let myself see before, which was that the water moved differently where they stood, not in response to wind or current, but toward them, a subtle and consistent draw, as if the water itself was aware of them and interested, as if the lake was doing something on their behalf or for their benefit or at their direction. The fish I found dead on the dock boards each morning were not caught. They were called. I went back inside and opened the 2nd envelope. My father had written that the 2nd envelope was for financial emergencies, but I'd been standing at that window watching 6 impossible people stand at the edge of a lake, and I needed more information, and the envelope was there, and I opened it.
If you're reading this early, he'd written, it's because you've started to understand. That means you're smarter than I was. It took me 15 years. Here's what I know. The family has been coming to this property since your grandfather built it in 1949. He made an arrangement with them. I don't know the exact terms because he died before he could tell me, but I've pieced it together over 30 years of working here. They come every 3 years because the lake provides something they need. I don't know what exactly. I know it has to do with the water. I know the North Dock is where they used to go before your grandfather closed it off, and I know that closing it off was the first term of whatever agreement he made with them. What I know about what they are, they don't age. They don't eat the way we eat. They need the water the way we need air, or maybe more than that, maybe the way we need sleep. The lake does something to them, restores something, and what it costs the lake is the fish, and possibly other things. And I've chosen not to investigate too closely because the arrangement has kept this family safe and this lodge running, and I didn't want to know what the cost column actually looked like. What I know about the North Dock. Your grandfather closed it because something happened there. A guest. I found a photograph in his things when he died. A man named Thomas Avery, a guest who'd been staying here during the family's visit in October of 1961. He was never reported missing. His family was contacted and told he'd checked out and driven home. I found the photograph because your grandfather had written on the back of it, in his own handwriting, "The water keeps what it takes." I don't know what he meant. I've chosen not to know. The payment they leave is enough to run this lodge for 3 years. It's in currency that's difficult to trace. Don't question it. I love you. I'm sorry.
I sat in the office for a very long time after reading that. Then I took a flashlight down to the North Dock. I knew what I was looking for. I didn't know how I knew. Some combination of the iron strips and the thing my grandfather had written, and 20 years of half-seen patterns clicking into place. And I found it almost immediately, because the water under the North Dock, that same dark, deeper than it should be water, was not uniform. And when I shone the light at the right angle, I could see that the darkness had a shape. And the shape was large. And the shape was not moving the way water moves. It was moving the way something in water moves. I went back inside. I did not go back to the North Dock that week. On the 5th evening, I was in the lodge kitchen when I heard a sound I'd never heard before from the direction of the water cabin. which was a voice, raised in what I can only describe as argument. Not the words, which I couldn't make out, but the specific frequency of anger, constrained by the need to be quiet. The sound of people saying things they don't want overheard. I went to the porch. The younger woman was standing outside the water cabin door, and the older man was in the doorway. And even from 40 feet away, I could read the specific geometry of the exchange, which was her wanting something and him refusing it, and her posture saying, "This isn't over," and his posture saying, "It is." She looked up and saw me watching. She crossed the lawn to the porch in a way that was, I want to be precise here, faster than it should have been. Not running, but covering the distance in fewer steps than the distance warranted. And she came up the porch steps and stood in front of me and said,
Can we talk inside?
We sat in the office, and she looked at the driftwood sign above the door for a moment before she looked at me.
I know your father left you letters.
She said.
The older man, he knows too. That's what we were arguing about.
How do you know about the letters? I said.
Because your grandfather told us about them before he died. He thought it was important that we know what you'd eventually find out. I want to tell you some things. Not everything. There are things I genuinely can't explain in terms you'd be able to verify. But some things. Because your family has held up their end of an agreement for 70 years. And you deserve to understand what the agreement actually is.
I nodded.
The North Dock. Your grandfather closed it because of what happened in 1961. And what happened in 1961 was our fault. And we have never gone back there because that was the term your grandfather set. We agreed to it. We've honored it for 60 years.
The man in the photograph, I said. Thomas Avery. She went very still.
You found that?
My father did. He left it for me to find. She looked at her hands for a moment.
The man chose something we can't undo. Your grandfather understood that. He was angry, and the terms he set were hard. And we've honored them because it was fair.
She looked up.
The water under that dock it's a convergence point. It has a specific quality that matters to us in a way I don't have clean language for. Your grandfather closing that dock cost us something real. But what happened to that man would have happened differently if we'd been more careful, more honest about what the water does when we're in it.
What does it do? I said.
It calls.
She said, simply.
To things that can hear it. We can hear it. And sometimes, if someone is at the water's edge when we're working, if they're in the water, they can hear it too. And once you've heard it, the lake keeps what it takes. That's what your grandfather wrote on the photograph. He understood it.
You took that man.
The water took him. We didn't stop it.
The difference felt important to her. I wasn't sure yet if it was important to me. What are you? She looked at me for a long time.
We were people, a very long time ago, in a place where the water had the same quality as the water here. We made a choice, and the choice changed us, and we've been like this for a very long time. We don't die the way you die. We don't age. We need the water every few years the way you need sleep, to restore something, to drain off what accumulates. Without it, we become wrong. dangerous in ways we can't control.
The fish.
A side effect. The water around us during those nights. It becomes a different kind of water. Things in it don't survive well. We've learned to stay away from larger creatures. Mostly.
I thought about Thomas Avery, about what my grandfather had written. "What do you need from me?" I said. "What does the arrangement actually require?"
We need access to this water every 3 years. We need the cabin. We need you not to tell anyone we exist. And we need the North Dock to stay closed.
Why?
Because what's under that dock is old, and it's hungry, and the iron keeps it focused, and the focus keeps it from ranging. And if someone goes out there and disturbs the iron, or removes it, what's under that water becomes everyone's problem.
She looked at me steadily.
It's not one of us. It was there before us. It's why the water here has the quality it has. We didn't create it, we just found it. And we've been managing it in a way as part of being here.
I thought about the shape in the dark water, the way it moved. My grandfather knew about it.
He learned about it the same way you just did. By going to the North Dock with a flashlight.
She almost smiled.
He was less calm about it than you're being.
I'm going to skip ahead now, not because nothing happened in the rest of that visit, but because what happened is private in a way that doesn't belong in this account. Conversations that went deep into the night. Things she told me about what they were and what they'd been, and what the world looked like from inside a life measured in centuries instead of decades. Things I don't have the right to repeat. What I'll tell you is what happened on the last night of their stay. I woke at 2 a.m. to the sound of the water, which is not unusual. You can hear the lake from the lodge when the wind is right. But this was not the usual sound. This was the lake behaving differently. And I know that sounds like something I shouldn't be able to identify, but I grew up next to that water, and I know what it sounds like when it's normal. And this was not normal. I went to the window. The family was on the bank, all 6 of them, and they were all facing the North Dock, and the North Dock was lit from beneath by something I can only describe as the water itself. A cold, pale light coming up through the dark water, illuminating the dock boards from below. And on the North Dock, walking toward the end, was a figure I didn't recognize. A man, adult, moving with the slow, deliberate drift of someone half-conscious or fully transfixed. And I understood immediately what my grandfather had written and what she had explained. And I was out the door before I was fully awake. I shouted from the bank. He didn't respond, didn't slow, didn't turn, kept walking toward the end of the dock where the water was deepest and the iron strips ran out and the convergence point sat directly below. The older man reached the dock before me, which again should not have been physically possible given where he was standing when I came out the door, and he grabbed the figure by the arm, and the contact broke whatever had hold of him, because the man stumbled and looked around like someone waking from a dream. The older man walked him back to the bank. I met them at the edge of the dock. The man, a guest from cabin 3, I recognized him now, here with his wife for a fishing weekend, completely ordinary, looked at me with eyes that were still half somewhere else. "I heard something," he said. "In the water. I thought..." He shook his head. "I thought someone was calling my name." I put him back in cabin 3, with the door locked and a glass of water, and a story about sleepwalking and the dock being unsafe. And I stood in his doorway until he was under the covers and his breathing was slow. And then I went back to the bank. The older man was standing at the water's edge alone. The others had gone back to the water cabin. I stood next to him and looked at the North Dock, and the cold light was gone now, the water back to its ordinary black. "That's never happened before," I said.
It's happened twice before. Once before your grandfather closed the dock, and once in 1961.
We stood there for a while, not talking. "The man in the photograph," I said. "Thomas Avery. He heard it calling his name."
Yes.
"And he went in."
Yes.
"And the lake kept him." He didn't say anything. "Is he still there?" I said. "Whatever is still down there, is he part of it now?" A very long pause.
We don't know. We've never known how to answer that question. And we've been trying to answer it for 60 years.
That was the last conversation I had with him. They left the next morning before dawn, the way they always left. The panel van gone before the first light. Payment left in an envelope on the cabin table. The cabin itself clean and precise. Beds made, every surface wiped. I went to the water cabin and opened the envelope and put the money in the safe without counting it, the way my father had said. And then I sat in the empty cabin for a long time and looked at the lake through the window. That was 14 months ago. I'm still here. I've thought about leaving, more than once, more than I'd like to admit. I've sat in the office with the keys to my car and mapped out what it would look like to just go. To put the lodge up for sale and walk away from the water and the North Dock and the thing beneath it, and the family that returns every 3 years to manage. Whatever arrangement my grandfather made in 1949 with something he pulled from a lake. I've thought about burning the North Dock, removing the iron, or the opposite, reinforcing it, adding more, researching what else might hold the water-dark thing below in place more securely. I've thought about calling authorities, which is the thought I always dismiss fastest because I know exactly how that conversation ends, and I know exactly what happens to a remote fishing lodge that becomes the center of an investigation involving missing persons and strange water and guests who don't age. And none of those things are good. I've thought about Thomas Avery and his family, who were told he checked out and drove home, who have spent 60 years not knowing, and whether I owe them something, and what I could possibly give them that wouldn't destroy them. I've thought, most of all, about the man from cabin 3 who heard his name in the water and walked toward it, like a man walking towards something he'd been waiting for his whole life and didn't know it. And about how close the end of that story came to being different. And about what my grandfather must have felt the night he stood on that bank in 1961 and understood what the water had done and couldn't undo. There's something my grandfather carved into the underside of the driftwood sign. I found it last winter when I took the sign down to reseal it. Text I'd never seen, in his handwriting, small enough to be invisible unless you were looking. The water keeps what it takes. Keep it from taking. I put the sign back up. The family is due in October. I've reinforced the iron on the North Dock. I've moved the guests in cabins 1 through 4 to the main lodge and told them the waterside cabins need maintenance work, which they believed without question because nobody questions the reasonable explanation when you offer it with enough confidence. I've been sleeping better than I have in years, actually, which I attribute to finally understanding the shape of the thing I've been living inside my whole life. Because the unknown is always heavier than the known, even when the known is bad. But there's one thing I haven't been able to stop thinking about. One detail I keep returning to. One piece I can't make fit cleanly into the picture my father and grandfather and the woman from the water cabin have given me. The payment in the safe. The envelopes they leave every 3 years. The old currency in no particular order. The money that keeps this lodge running. I counted it the last time, despite my father's instruction not to, and the total was not what I expected. And the oldest bills in the envelope were not from my grandfather's time, not from the beginning of the arrangement. They were older than that. Much older. Which means the arrangement at Harlow Lake Lodge did not begin with my grandfather. It began with whoever owned this land before him, and whoever owned it before that. I've been going through the county records. I've found 3 previous structures on this property, each one demolished or abandoned, each one at the edge of the same lake, each one with some record of unusual departures, guests who left without settling accounts, workers who quit without notice, a family member here and there who simply stopped appearing in documents without explanation. The oldest record I found is from 1887. A letter from a land assessor noting that the property was uninhabited and had been for some time, and that the previous occupant, whose name was listed as Harlow, which is where the lake got its name, which I had always assumed was my grandfather's family, but apparently predates him by 60 years, had departed without registering a forwarding address. At the bottom of the assessor's report, in different handwriting, a single added note. Property features a dock on the north shore, constructed from unusual timber, reinforced with iron, origin unknown. Recommend leaving intact. Previous owner was clear on this point. I've started to wonder if my grandfather didn't make an arrangement. I've started to wonder if the arrangement made him.
The family arrives in 3 weeks. I'll be ready. I've left a 4th envelope in the office safe, sealed, addressed to whoever comes after me. Because I've come to understand that the lodge outlasts its owners, the same way the lake outlasts everything, and someone is going to need to know what I know. I've written it all down. The north dock, the iron, the thing in the water and what keeps it focused, and what happens if the focus breaks. And at the bottom, the same thing my grandfather wrote, because I understand it now the way I didn't before. Because I've been to the north dock in the dark, and I've heard what the water sounds like when it's working. And I know that what's beneath that dock is old enough to have been there before anyone living remembers, and patient enough to wait for whatever comes after all of us. The water keeps what it takes. Keep it from taking